The night Rebecca Holloway died, it rained so heavily that the sound on the hospital roof masked her final breaths. Her husband Michael clutched her hand while their son Oliver, just 7 years old, pressed his small body against the window, watching raindrops race down the glass rather than witnessing his mother's face grow still. The cancer had taken 18 months to consume her, 18 months of treatments that promised more than they delivered, of hushed conversations behind closed doors, of Oliver learning to prepare his own breakfast because his father was too exhausted from night shifts at the hospital. Later, Oliver would remember little about that night except for two details: the rhythmic beeping of monitors suddenly replaced by a sustained tone, and the strange smile on his father's face when he thought no one was looking. Not a smile of relief that his wife's suffering had ended, something else entirely. Something Oliver wouldn't understand until years later. What Michael Holloway whispered to his wife's corpse after the nurses left the room remained unknown to anyone else. But whatever those words were, they marked the beginning of the fiction that would become Oliver's life. By Oliver's 10th birthday, the memory of his mother had faded to impressions rather than clear images: the scent of lavender, the sound of piano music drifting through their home, the softness of her cardigan against his cheek when she held him. His father had removed most photographs of Rebecca, claiming it was too painful to see them daily. Only one remained, a small framed picture on Oliver's nightstand of the three of them at the beach, taken when Oliver was 5 and his mother still had her long auburn hair, before illness had stripped it away. Life with just his father had settled into predictable patterns. Michael worked as a logistics consultant, which required frequent travel, 3 days here, a week there, sometimes longer. When home, he compensated with intense attention, taking Oliver hiking, to museums, to baseball games. Between these bursts of fatherly devotion stretched long absences where Oliver stayed with Mrs. Abernathy, their elderly neighbor who smelled of menthol and cats. Oliver had grown accustomed to this arrangement, if not comfortable with it. He developed a talent for silence, for occupying minimal space, for noticing things others overlooked. His teachers described him as observant and thoughtful in parent-teacher conferences, their polite substitutes for withdrawn and isolated. While other children formed boisterous friendships, Oliver cataloged patterns: which students always wore the same colors, which teachers touched their glasses before giving difficult answers, which clouds presaged storms. This gift for observation served little purpose until the day his father brought Vanessa Grant to dinner. Vanessa arrived with calculated warmth, her hug lasting precisely the appropriate length, her gift, a model airplane kit, demonstrating research into Oliver's interests without suggesting too much familiarity. She asked questions and genuinely listened to his answers, her head tilted at an angle that communicated attentiveness. Oliver noted how she never completely turned her back to Michael, how she unconsciously mirrored his posture, how her laughter came just seconds after his. 8 months later, she became Vanessa Holloway. The wedding was small: Michael's colleagues, Vanessa's sister and her husband, a handful of mutual friends. Oliver stood beside his father in a rented suit, holding the rings on a small pillow, watching Vanessa's smile falter almost imperceptibly when Michael stumbled over "Till death do us part." The new family moved to Vanessa's house in Oak Ridge, a suburb 40 minutes from Oliver's former school. The house was larger, with a swimming pool that Oliver was forbidden to use unsupervised and a guest room that became his bedroom, decorated with constellations that glowed in the dark. Vanessa tried. Oliver had to acknowledge that. She packed elaborate lunches, organized his clothes by color, researched the best teachers at his new school. But beneath her efforts lay something performative, as though she were following instructions from a manual titled, "How to Mother a Child That Isn't Yours." Her attention, like his father's, came in concentrated bursts rather than steady waves. Oliver's father continued his travel schedule. If anything, the trips grew more frequent after the marriage. 3 days in Denver, 5 in Seattle, a week in Chicago, always returning with small gifts and stories about terrible hotel pillows and delayed flights. The unraveling began, as significant things often do, with something very small: a receipt. Oliver found it while searching for tape in his father's home office desk, a receipt from a toy store in Boston dated 3 weeks earlier. This would have been unremarkable except for two facts. His father had been in Phoenix that week, not Boston, and the purchase was for a doll, specifically a Princess Eliza musical doll with light-up crown. Oliver kept the receipt, tucking it into the pages of his science textbook. He told himself there must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps his father had ordered it online for a colleague's daughter. Perhaps the store had multiple locations. Perhaps it was a mistake. Then came the phone call. It was a Tuesday evening. Vanessa was at her book club. Oliver was supposed to be showering before bed, but he'd forgotten his clean pajamas and padded downstairs in his socks. His father sat at the kitchen island, his back to the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. "I miss you too, sweetheart," Michael said, his voice softer than Oliver had ever heard it. "Daddy will be home on Friday, I promise." "Yes, I'll bring something special." A pause. "I love you to the moon and stars. Put Mommy back on now." Oliver stood frozen, unable to retreat without making noise, unable to process what he was hearing. His father's next words eliminated any possibility of innocent explanation. "Madison needs to understand that just because she's 7 doesn't mean she can have everything she wants. We talked about consistent parenting, Claire." Oliver backed away slowly, careful to avoid the creaking floorboard near the kitchen entrance. He returned to his room without showering, claiming to Vanessa later that he'd already done so before she got home. That night, he stared at the glowing constellations on his ceiling and wondered if everything in his life was a lie. The discovery awakened something in Oliver, an obsessive need to verify what he'd heard, to prove to himself that he hadn't misunderstood or imagined it. He began documenting his father's travels in a notebook, noting departure dates, stated destinations, return times. He created a crude map, pushing pins into cities where his father claimed to be. For 3 months, he gathered what anyone would have considered circumstantial evidence. His father mentioned a snowstorm in Dallas when the weather there had been mild. He brought home a Minneapolis refrigerator magnet when he'd supposedly been in Atlanta. He had a sunburn after a purported week in Seattle during its rainiest month. Oliver's suspicions might have remained just that if not for his father's carelessness with his laptop one Sunday morning. Michael had been checking email at the breakfast table when Vanessa called him to help move a heavy planter on the patio. He left without closing his screen. 10 minutes. That's all Oliver had before his father returned, but it was enough. Enough to see the mortgage payment confirmation for a house in Brookline, Massachusetts. Enough to see emails addressed to Daddy from an account named Maddie Princess. Enough to see a family calendar showing a dentist appointment for Madison and a parent-teacher conference at Brookline Elementary. That night, Oliver tried to tell Vanessa. He approached her while she was folding laundry, her reading glasses perched on her nose, a rerun of a cooking show providing background noise. "I think Dad has another family," he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Vanessa's hand stilled on a towel. She looked at him over her glasses, her expression shifting from surprise to concern to something harder. "That's a very serious accusation, Oliver. What would make you say something like that?" He told her about the receipt, the phone call, the emails. As he spoke, he watched her face close like a door being slowly shut. "Your father works very hard to provide for us," she said when he finished. "This kind of attention-seeking isn't fair to him. I know adjusting to our new family hasn't been easy, but making up stories isn't the way to handle it." "I'm not making it up," Oliver insisted. "I can show you." "Enough." The sharpness in her voice startled them both. More softly, she added, "I think you need to talk to someone about these feelings. I'll look into finding you a therapist." The conversation ended there, but its consequences extended much further. Vanessa mentioned it to Michael, who responded with wounded disbelief, followed by concern about Oliver's emotional state. Within a week, Oliver was sitting across from Dr. Brenner, a child psychologist with gray hair and a habit of repeating Oliver's words back to him as questions. "You believe your father has another family? You found a receipt for a doll? You heard a phone conversation?" Dr. Brenner's notes undoubtedly included phrases like fantasy formation as grief response and attention-seeking behavior. Oliver quickly learned to recant, to suggest that perhaps he'd been confused or had dreamed it. This adjustment in strategy earned him approving nods and, after 6 sessions, a reduction in appointments to twice monthly rather than weekly. But Oliver hadn't abandoned his investigation. If anything, being disbelieved only strengthened his resolve. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During one of his father's longer trips, Vanessa invited her sister Caroline for the weekend. Caroline was younger than Vanessa, unmarried, with a career in journalism that took her around the country. She arrived with expensive wine for her sister and a complex jigsaw puzzle for Oliver. That evening, after Vanessa had gone to bed with a migraine, Caroline found Oliver still working on the puzzle in the living room. She sat across from him, helping to sort edge pieces. "You're very methodical," she observed after watching him work. "Good quality in an investigator." Oliver glanced up, unsure how to respond. "Vanessa mentioned you've been having some thoughts about your dad," Caroline continued, fitting 2 pieces together with a satisfying click. "Wanted to tell me about it?" There was something in her tone, Not condescension, not disbelief, but genuine curiosity that made Oliver decide to trust her. He retrieved his notebook from its hiding place beneath his mattress and showed her everything: the documented discrepancies, the printed screenshot of the mortgage payment, the receipt. Caroline examined each item carefully, her journalist's eyes narrowing at certain details. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured. "I need you to understand something, Oliver. Adults are complicated. Sometimes they make choices that hurt people, not because they're evil, but because they're weak or scared or selfish. If what you're suggesting is true, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, it would be a very serious situation." "Vanessa doesn't believe me," Oliver said, his voice small. "Sometimes it's hardest to see the truth about people we love," Caroline replied. "But here's what I know. Evidence doesn't lie. People do." Before leaving Sunday evening, Caroline slipped Oliver her business card with her personal cell number written on the back. "If you find anything else," she whispered, "or if you ever feel unsafe, call me anytime." 2 weeks later, Oliver made the call. The school trip to the Museum of Science and Industry should have been routine: permission slips, packed lunches, assigned buddies. But when Oliver's class passed through the aerospace exhibit, he froze before a donor wall, his eyes fixed on a brass plaque: the Madison Holloway Young Explorers Fund, established by Michael and Claire Holloway, Brookline, Massachusetts. His teacher had to call his name 3 times before he rejoined the group, his mind racing with implications. This wasn't just a mistress or a secret girlfriend. This was a family established enough, permanent enough, to donate substantially to a major museum. This was a family with his father's name, their name. He called Caroline from a bathroom stall, whispering the discovery into his phone. Her response was immediate. "Take a photo if you can. I'm coming this weekend. Tell Vanessa I'm surprising you for your half-birthday or something." Caroline arrived Friday night while Michael was once again traveling. She brought the promised half-birthday cake and something else: a small GPS tracker she'd acquired through a private investigator friend. "It's not strictly ethical," she admitted as she showed Oliver how it worked, "but neither is what your father seems to be doing." They placed it in Michael's suitcase lining that night, Caroline lifting it carefully from the closet shelf while Oliver kept watch. The plan was simple. The next time Michael left for a business trip, they would have proof of where he actually went. They didn't have to wait long. For days later, Michael announced he needed to fly to Minneapolis for a conference. The tracker showed he went to Boston instead. Caroline took a personal day from work and drove Oliver directly from school to Vanessa's office. They found her in a meeting, but Caroline's insistence that it was a family emergency gained them entry to her glass-walled conference room. "This has gone far enough," Vanessa hissed, embarrassed by the interruption. "Whatever conspiracy theory you're encouraging." Caroline placed her laptop on the table, open to a map showing a blinking dot in Brookline, Massachusetts. "Michael is there right now, not in Minneapolis." Vanessa stared at the screen, her face draining of color. "This is illegal. You can't just—" "There's more," Caroline interrupted, pulling up property records, the museum donor page, and finally, most damning of all, social media profiles Caroline had uncovered for a Claire Holloway of Brookline, whose photos included a dark-haired girl around 7 years old and occasional glimpses of a man whose face was always partially obscured or turned away, a man who was unmistakably Michael. Vanessa's professional composure crumbled. She dismissed her team from the conference room with a tight smile that dissolved the moment the door closed. For several minutes, she said nothing, just clicked through the evidence again and again, her manicured nail tapping against the touchpad with increasing force. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm in a way that suggested suppressed fury rather than acceptance. "How long have you known?" "Oliver discovered it months ago. He tried to tell you." Vanessa turned to Oliver, seeing him, truly seeing him, perhaps for the first time. "I owe you an apology," she said, each word precise. "I should have listened." The drive home was silent. Vanessa called her assistant to clear her schedule for the remainder of the week, then sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead while Caroline drove. Oliver watched from the back as Vanessa methodically removed her wedding ring, placed it in her purse, then closed the clasp with a definitive click. They waited. Caroline argued for immediate confrontation, but Vanessa insisted on preparation: financial documents gathered, accounts separated, consultations with lawyers scheduled. She moved through these tasks with mechanical efficiency, her emotions locked behind a wall of practicality. Oliver watched her transformation with a mixture of awe and concern. The Vanessa who had dismissed his fears was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused. She didn't cry, at least not where he could see. Instead, she planned. When Michael returned 3 days later, Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen island, a glass of red wine before her, papers arranged in neat stacks. Oliver had been instructed to remain upstairs with Caroline, but he positioned himself at the top of the staircase, able to hear without being seen. Michael entered with his usual post-trip cheer, calling out greetings, stopping short when he saw Vanessa's expression. "How's Claire?" Vanessa asked without preamble. "And Madison? I understand she's quite the little princess." Michael's silence was confirmation enough. "How long?" Vanessa's voice remained steady. "Van, I can explain it." "How long?" The pause stretched until it seemed the air itself might crack under the pressure. 12 years. The mathematical implication hit Oliver like physical force. 12 years. Before his mother died. Before the cancer. While his parents were still married. "So this isn't just bigamy," Vanessa said, the legal term falling like a gavel. "This was adultery against Rebecca too." Michael began a defense that sounded rehearsed, as though he'd prepared for this moment, how he'd met Claire during a business trip, how one thing led to another, how he'd found himself trapped between two lives, unable to choose without causing pain. Unable to choose? Vanessa's laugh held no humor. "You did choose. Every day for 12 years, you chose deception." "I loved Rebecca," Michael insisted. "And I love you. It's complicated." "No," Vanessa cut him off. "Quantum physics is complicated. What you did is merely despicable." Oliver didn't hear the rest. He retreated to his room, Caroline following with concern etched on her face. He sat on his bed, staring at the constellations that no longer glowed with their former brightness, the adhesive having weakened over time. "Did you know my mom died of cancer?" he asked Caroline. "Yes," she answered, sitting beside him. "She was sick for a long time before that." Caroline nodded, unsure where this was leading. That means he was going back and forth between them while she was dying, while she needed him. The realization crystallized something inside Oliver, not just anger, but a profound understanding of betrayal that seemed beyond his years. Downstairs, voices had risen. There was the sound of something shattering Vanessa's wine glass or perhaps her restraint. Michael's footsteps pounded up the stairs, and then he was at Oliver's doorway, face flushed. "Pack a bag," he ordered. "We're leaving." Caroline stood. "You're not taking him anywhere." "He's my son." "A fact you seem to forget regularly for the past 12 years, Caroline shot back. Michael stepped toward Oliver, who recoiled instinctively. The movement was small but unmistakable. Something in Michael's expression collapsed. "Oliver," he said, his voice softening. "I know this is confusing, but you're still my son. I still love you." Oliver looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw not the hero he'd once believed in but a man divided, diminished by his own choices. When he spoke, his voice was steadier than he expected. "Did Mom know? About Claire and Madison?" Michael's hesitation was answer enough. "Then I don't want to go with you." It was the longest night of Oliver's life. Vanessa called the police when Michael refused to leave. Officers arrived, spoke privately with each adult, then informed Michael that while he had parental rights, forcing Oliver to leave against his will could be problematic given the circumstances. They suggested he depart peacefully and address custody through proper legal channels. Michael left just before dawn, promising Oliver they would talk soon, that he would explain everything. Oliver watched from his window as his father's car disappeared down the street, headlights cutting through the pre-morning darkness. The weeks following Michael's departure brought a cascade of revelations. Legal proceedings uncovered the full extent of his deception. 2 mortgages, 2 car payments, 2 life insurance policies, credit cards in both homes, separate bank accounts for separate lives, holiday traditions duplicated across state lines. Most shocking to Oliver was the discovery of college funds, one for him, one for Madison, with identical monthly contributions. As if his father had been determined to maintain perfect equality between his children, even in his dishonesty. The story broke in local papers, then spread to national outlets. "Double life dad," screamed one tabloid headline. Caroline managed to shield Oliver from the worst of the publicity, but he still overheard whispers at school, caught classmates staring when they thought he wasn't looking. Through her lawyer, Claire Holloway requested privacy. Oliver learned she had been told that Rebecca died years before she actually did, that Michael had presented himself as a grieving widower when they met. She had been deceived too, though not as completely as Rebecca or Vanessa. There was just one conversation between Oliver and his father during this period, a supervised visit at his therapist's office. Dr. Brenner, to her credit, had apologized to Oliver for not taking his concerns seriously. Michael arrived with a gift, a new model airplane kit, more complex than the one Vanessa had given him upon their first meeting, and rehearsed explanations that dissolved under Oliver's direct questions. "Were you with her when Mom died?" Michael looked away. "I was at the hospital with you and your mother. But you called Claire that night, didn't you? After Mom was gone." His father's silence was confirmation. "That's why you were smiling," Oliver said, a long-held memory suddenly making sense. "You were going to be free. You thought you could just move us to Boston and have one family finally." "It wasn't like that," Michael protested weakly. "I loved your mother. I was devastated when she died, but relieved too." Michael had no answer for that. The courts eventually granted Vanessa temporary guardianship of Oliver while custody arrangements were determined. Though not his biological mother, her role in his life for the past 3 years and Michael's demonstrated pattern of deception weighed in her favor. That Michael didn't contest this decision told Oliver everything he needed to know about his father's priorities. The most unexpected development came 2 months after Michael's exposure, when Vanessa received a letter from Claire Holloway suggesting that Oliver might want to meet his half-sister. Madison had been asking questions about her brother, a brother she'd only recently learned existed. Vanessa presented the letter to Oliver without comment, allowing him to make his own decision. He read it 3 times before responding. "I think I'd like to meet her," he said finally. "She didn't do anything wrong either." The meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a park halfway between their homes. Caroline accompanied Oliver and Vanessa, providing both moral support and a buffer against potential awkwardness. They spotted Claire and Madison immediately upon arrival. The girl had their father's dark hair and olive complexion, but her mannerisms, the way she bounced slightly on her toes when standing still, the way she tilted her head when listening were all her own. Oliver had prepared himself to feel resentment or jealousy toward this girl who had unknowingly shared his father. Instead, he felt an unexpected protectiveness. Madison approached cautiously, studying him with intense curiosity. "You look like Daddy," she said finally. "You do too," he replied. It wasn't much of a beginning, but it was something authentic in a landscape of lies. 3 years later, Oliver stands at the edge of a different swimming pool, watching Madison demonstrate her underwater handstand. At 13, he's grown taller, less inclined to silence, though still observant. The glowing constellations have been replaced by actual astronomy posters, his newest fascination. Vanessa sits nearby, engaged in conversation with Claire. Their relationship, initially tense with shared betrayal, has evolved into something resembling friendship. They will never be close, but they've found common ground in their determination to help their children navigate the aftermath of Michael's deception. Michael himself is a peripheral figure now. After the divorce settlements, there were 2, finalized within months of each other. He relocated to Chicago. He sends birthday and Christmas gifts, makes occasional phone calls that grow increasingly strained as Oliver's questions become more pointed with age. He has visitation rights that he exercises sporadically, always with advance notice to both households. Caroline visits often, having become something of a hero to Oliver. She's writing a book about investigative techniques and sometimes consults him on chapters, valuing his perspective on how children process information differently than adults. Oliver watches Madison surface from her handstand, water streaming from her hair as she grins triumphantly in his direction. They meet twice monthly now, these half-siblings united by complicated circumstances. Their relationship isn't perfect. They argue about music, about which parent should host holidays, about whose turn it is to choose the restaurant for lunch, but it's real, unvarnished by lies. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the water, Oliver reflects on the patterns that led him to discover his father's secret. He still documents things, still maintains a certain vigilance about details others might miss. But he's learning to balance observation with participation, to be in moments rather than merely cataloging them. Tonight, Vanessa will drive him home after dinner with Claire and Madison. Tomorrow, he has plans to go hiking with friends from his new school. Next weekend, Caroline is taking him to visit college campuses, though graduation remains years away. Life continues its forward momentum. The truth, Oliver has discovered, doesn't arrive as a single, clarifying moment. It unfolds gradually, revealing itself in layers, each one altering the landscape of what came before. Sometimes it devastates. Sometimes it liberates. Always, it transforms. What remains after deception isn't certainty, it's the capacity to live with questions that may never have satisfactory answers. To build something authentic from the rubble of fiction. To recognize that while patterns may help identify lies, they cannot predict the entire shape of truth. Madison calls his name, challenging him to a race across the pool. Oliver sets aside his thoughts and dives in, cutting through water toward his sister, toward whatever complicated future awaits them both.